Brilliant. Well, welcome back, everyone. Happy Thursday morning. Lots of lovely, happy, smiling faces. So please do pop on those headsets that you've got on your seats. You'll get a much better sound experience, and you'll get to hear the dulcet tones of myself and the beautiful Paul Robinson, who's going to be following me here. He's going to be talking to you all about ISO standards and event sustainability. Now, just a reminder, we've got a lovely little QR code just on the screen over there, which will allow you to ask any questions for Paul during the talk. We'll get to those at some point at the end, but also we'll be running around with a microphone, so whatever you prefer. Without further ado, over to Paul.
Thank you very much. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Event Sustainability Live. As Van said, my name is Paul Robinson. I work for a company called Robinson Management Services, and we help companies to implement and maintain ISO standards across a broad range of industries. But today, obviously, we're talking about the sustainable event industry. So, without further ado, we're going to talk about ISO 2012-1 and its applicability to the event industry. First thing to stress is that ISO 2012-1, by its nature, is an international standard. That's the I in ISO. So it applies to any organisation, anywhere in the world. And obviously the specific focus with ISO 2012-1 is the event industry. It's an internationally recognised framework, and it also supports alignment with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it doesn't mandate that, but if you're smart about how you apply it, you can very much integrate it with achieving the progress towards those UN SDGs within your organisation. The other key thing to stress about ISO 2012-1, it's a requirements-based standard. So it's based on clauses and requirements. There's a number of shall statements in the standard. And those shall statements basically translate into you must. You know, these are things you must do to establish a management system framework and maintain it within your organisation. So those shalls are the requirements, and really what we need to demonstrate is compliance and conformity to those requirements when you're implementing and also maintaining your management system framework. 2012-1 itself was born out of the London Olympics in 2012, hence 2012-1. The one bit, generally in standards terms, means it's a certifiable standard. So there are organisations that can actually certify you against this particular standard. Sadly, it's not an accredited standard. We didn't get that far down the road with accreditation, but I'll talk a bit more about that later. We talk about other standards that align with 2012-1. The other key thing to stress as well is the standard's currently in review. So it's periodically standards get updated and reviewed, and occasionally they pop out the other side with tweaks and changes. And that's a pretty obvious reason, really, is that as standards evolve, sustainability evolves, you know, issues around businesses evolve. For example, the emergence of AI, you know, is a big issue now for, you know, all organisations, and these considerations are being built into revisions of the standard. So it's ensuring that the standard is maintained and stays fresh and updated, and more importantly, relevant as well for the industry. The unique thing about ISO 2012-1 is it can be applied across a number of different areas. So a couple of examples here. If you're a venue, for example, you can apply 2012-1 and apply it to your venue and get certified, you know, a sustainable event management system certified for your particular venue. If you're a supplier to the events industry, you know, a stand builder or many of the organisations that we see in the room today, you can get certified to ISO 2012-1. Or if you run a particular event or a portfolio of events, again, you can get the event certified to ISO 2012-1. So it can be applied in a number of different ways, and I've seen it applied across different types of organisation, you know, all across UK and Europe. So very relevant to know that. And again, that's unique to 2012-1 and how it's applied within organisations. The key thing with that, of course, is for the event industry, anybody within the event industry can apply it. So basically, anybody in the room today. I'm not going to go into this in depth. I'm not here to talk about requirements and clauses and specifics within the standard, but what I will do is talk you through the basic approach to implementing ISO 20012-1 in any organisation, whether, again, you be an event venue or an event organiser or a supplier to the event industry. First thing to stress here is the concept of the plan, do, check, act cycle. And that cycle really is aimed at driving continual improvement. That's what a lot of these standards are focused on, driving continual improvement within your organisation, but also managing risks, managing opportunities, and of course, driving sustainability. So we start at the top here with the planning clauses, these dark blue clauses here, these requirements. At a very high level, what we're asking you to do here is identify your strategic issues and engage with your stakeholders. Now, I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail in a couple of minutes' time, so I won't dwell on that now. It's really important to define your scope and boundaries, firstly of the management system, but also for certification purposes as well. So the scope basically defines what you do as an organisation or as an event or whatever it might be. The boundaries are generally the physical boundaries around what you do. So that could be your organisational boundaries in deciding which offices, which events, which locations actually sit within scope of certification. And that, again, is really important in defining what's in, but also more importantly, what's out of certification as well. So once you understand that, then you can start to think about your principles and purpose and values. And again, I've got some detailed examples there of what ISO is looking for in defining those values specifically. From there then, we can define our sustainable development policy. And again, the standard is very clear in what it's expecting there in terms of what should be in a policy statement, in terms of those commitments that they're asking you to sort of sign up to. And obviously get top management endorsement of that as well. Once you know your direction, then you can start to assign roles, responsibilities, levels of authority across the whole organisation. And that helps, again, get engagement into the management system. From there, at an operational level, we can start to set event or determine event issues and set clear objectives, either for the organisation or the event in particular. Now, again, talking about event issues, that's a central pillar of ISO 2012-1. It's unique to 2012-1, and of course it covers a broad range of issues. So, economic, social, and environmental issues. So that whole environmental sustainability considerations there. Once we've set our objectives, then we can set about getting on with it, doing stuff. So this is the day-to-day delivery of events. So here we need to obviously provide resources. We need trained people. We need competent people. We need people who are aware of what they're doing. So they need to be aware of policies, procedures, ways of working, so that we do things in a repeatable and consistent manner. We also need to talk to those people. So we need to maintain communications both internally and also externally. So again, once we've defined who our stakeholders are, who we need to speak to, we need to have those communications channels in place. We need to maintain documentation. Now, there's a lot of myths around documentation in ISO standards. There's a lot of hangovers from sort of 1990s and beyond, where standards were very heavy on documentation. You needed procedures for this, that, and the other. That's all gone now these days. So you define basically what you need in terms of documentation for your organisation as to what's appropriate. And of course, these days, that documentation can be electronic in its nature or hard copy. Again, you decide. It's not prescriptive. From there, then, obviously, we can maintain operational controls, those processes, procedures, ways of working. Again, driving that consistent way of working, ensuring that we've got consistency of approach and we've got conformity with those requirements, both the requirements of the standards, but also they could be stakeholder requirements, contractual requirements, or self-imposed requirements, depending on the nature, again, of what you do. So that's basically your event delivery activities. At the back end of the standard, then, we talk about checking, the checking function. And we do that through monitoring and measuring. We set sensible KPIs and monitor and measure those KPIs. We then audit as well. We conduct internal audits of the management system, both of the clauses of the standard, but also your process. So we take a very process-based approach to conducting audits, with a view to identifying risks and opportunities as well. And again, the important thing here with auditing, auditing gets a bad rep. A good auditor will always try and find the positives in things. We're looking for conformity. We're not looking to try and trip you up, break the management system or do anything like that. It's all about trying to drive that improvement. And again, lots of continual improvement opportunities fall out of the auditing process. And of course, with sustainable events, we audit on site in venues like we are today, but also, again, back at base as well, looking at what you're doing in terms of the planning activities and the management activities around the management system. One other important thing here is looking at maturity as well. Again, unique to ISO 2012-1. And what I mean by maturity is right back here when we defined our principles, our purpose and values, we can then measure maturity against those purpose and values. Now, how you measure maturity against values, again, is a very subjective term, but again, there's methods and measures, and the standard is very useful in providing that guidance around that as well. Finally, we can enact. And what we mean by acting is actually taking actions on those improvements. If you take nothing away from this presentation other than this particular box in the corner here, if you act on non-conformities, act on opportunities, and make sure that when you address those non-conformities, you're actually addressing the root causes of those non-conformities, again, you will drive continual improvement within your organisation, with or without a management system. Just do that well, basically. And again, I've seen that used to really, really good effect in many organisations. I want to just touch on stakeholders. Now, ISO standards use interchangeable terms here. Some call it stakeholders, some call it interested parties. They're basically one and the same thing. They're the people, the organisations, the entities that interact with your organisation. And again, ISO 2012-1 is fantastic in providing a lot of guidance around this. Now, the specific requirement is to basically identify who your stakeholders are, and there's an example list here of who they might be, but also interact with them and determine what their needs and expectations are of you as an organisation, or as an event, or as a venue, for example. Now, in doing that, obviously, we can think about, okay, if they've got these expectations of us, then we can think about then how we meet those expectations and hopefully exceed them if we possibly can. So in the event of, say, for example, your clients and some of these people on the sort of the side here who are the people you're basically delivering to, if you can meet their expectations and exceed them, happy days. You've got happy customers, and they're going to come back and use you again. Therefore, that drives investment into your business. So from a financial sustainability perspective, you've got a financially sustainable business there. And obviously that can be reinvested into the business and onwards and upwards. So again, that's driving sustainability practices. So I'll tease out another couple of examples here. This particular one here, the event industry community. Again, really important example here of how the community comes together. I audit events, and very much, an event like this, for example, there'll be a huge community of suppliers, stakeholders involved in the delivery of an event like today. So, from a perspective of identifying who they are and coming together, delivering it, understanding their needs and expectations, again, that's going to drive improvement and long-term relationships as well. And ultimately the sustainability of the industry as well, which is really important. I mentioned I'd touch on sustainable event issues. There's a lot of information in this slide, so apologies for that, but it's really important to capture these. And again, ISO 2012-1 is really invaluable in providing examples of the types of issues you might come up against, either as a venue, as a supplier to the events industry, or as somebody running events on a day-to-day basis. Now, some of these issues were touched on in the previous presentation where we were talking about materials choices, use of raw materials, you know, some of the environmental considerations around sustainability. But it's important not to lose sight of the fact that true sustainability is about the balance between all of these three, the environmental, the social, and the economic. Many of the quick wins you'll find will be in the environmental area. You know, it's relatively straightforward to make tweaks, changes, and sort your approach out to ensure that, you know, you're not basically polluting the environment, or, you know, you're reducing your materials use. Just walking around today, no carpets, for example, fantastic. You know, they've eliminated a potential source of waste. However, there's a whole rake of other things here as well. You know, on the economic side, anti-competitive behaviour, bribery and corruption, you know, within the supply chain, for example. Economic performance, again, that's not a dirty word. It's not a bad thing to make profit, you know, as an event organiser or somebody delivering events. It's critical. You know, if you're not a financially sustainable organisation, how are you going to be able to do all this other stuff, you know, in the social and environmental areas? On the social side as well, there's a whole rake of different issues there. I mean, again, it depends on what the nature of your activities are. You know, you might be, for example, a rigging company. Health and safety at work is going to be quite important to you, you know, if you're setting up rigging, for example, and working at height. But a whole rake of other things there. Human development, training in the workplace. Again, these things that, again, all good organisations should be doing. One unusual one here that kind of, you look at it and think, that's a bit weird one. Illegal drugs and anti-doping. What's that all about? Well, this is a good example of where we get this, you know, the fact that it came out of the Olympics in 2012, you get the anti-doping references in there. So hence, you know, that's why it's in there. I'm again expecting some of these issues to get tidied up, tweaked, evolved as the standard evolves and gets revised. But again, it's all there for you as guidance. It's a starting point really to be able to enable you to firstly evaluate what issues are relevant to you as a business, which of these issues can you control as a business, and which of those can you influence potentially through your supply chain. It's really important to, you know, nail down which of those that you control. But also, from a standards perspective and from, again, a repeatable, consistent approach perspective, making sure that we've got some defined criteria to be able to measure and evaluate these issues in a consistent and repeatable way, so you're getting consistent results. And then from there, obviously, you can set meaningful objectives, set those addressing those significant issues that you feel are important to you and the ones that you feel you can actually make an impact on. So that's a little bit about sustainable event issues. Again, all this information is in the back of the standard as guidance, so very, very useful. Going to touch on purpose and values. Again, something that's unique to 2012-1, but very relevant, particularly when we're talking about sustainability. We need to think about, you know, first and foremost, what is our purpose? What are we here to do? You know, it's a fairly fundamental question, but it's a quite deep question when you start to think about it. You know, what's our purpose here? What are we actually doing? And fundamentally, what legacy do we want to leave? Yeah, what's our organisation going to look like in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, when actually I'm off, retired, you know, enjoying life on the beach, whatever. You know, what's the industry going to look like in 20 years' time? Who knows? And a really fundamental question, one that really gets organisations thinking, what are our values? You know, what do we stand for? What does good look like? You know, what do we stand for as an organisation? And again, the standard comes to our aid here. So if we're really struggling to think, do we have any values? I hope not, but this would give you a starting point. So we can include inclusivity, integrity, transparency, and stewardship. And they're 4 key values that the standard, again, encourages us to consider when we're establishing our statement of purpose and values. So we should be looking at these as a minimum. But again, you can, as an organisation, define your own values and expand upon these as you see fit. Could be, again, alignment with those UN SDGs, for example. But the other consideration here as well, as I mentioned earlier, is how you measure maturity against these values. And that can be done in a number of different ways. I've seen it done through staff engagement surveys. So you actually go out to your stakeholders and, again, engage with your stakeholders. Some of them may be your staff, could be external stakeholders, and ask them, how inclusive do you think we are? Do you think we act with integrity? Are we transparent in our communications? Are we actually demonstrating stewardship from an environmental perspective? If the answer comes back with a big no, then you've got work to do. But again, it's a useful indicator of where you are, and equally, as you go through those cycles of plan, do, check, act, and you re-measure yourself and re-measure your maturity, you should be able to see that journey you're going on. Now, this is not something you achieve in 6 months, 12 months. This is 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, 10 years even. It takes that long to get a real mature organisational approach to managing those sustainable issues. So in practice, what does this look like? Well, this might be a typical organisation. Anybody who might be, say, delivering a portfolio of events. It could even be a venue, for example. So the dotted line there defines our scope and boundaries that we talked about earlier. What's inside the management system? Then you've got these other things that are outside the management system. So from this side, we're looking at inputs. We've got sustainability issues. The issues that are out there in the big wide world. Things that are pulling and pushing our business around, our organisation around. We've also got our stakeholder requirements as well, which we've talked about as well. That gets fed into our planning activities. And out of the planning activities, as we've established, we get objectives. Those objectives get implemented. And then we get into the doing. Typically, we'll have some sales activities, event planning activities. We go into event delivery. And then there's post-event activities where you're doing the wrap-ups and feedback and, planning for the next cycle. That all equally feeds into the performance evaluation piece where you can review your KPIs, SLAs, whatever it might be, performance, feed that into the audit results, activities arising from the events, and that again feeds into our improvement actions, and we go again. So that's where we start to see our plan, do, check, act cycle working in practice. Supporting all of that, of course, is your support functions, and we mustn't forget them. So the people like HR, comms, purchasing, ensuring that all of this happens, seamlessly, and you've got the necessary resources in there to ensure that the actual event management cycle can work effectively. On the output side, hopefully, if we've done all this well, we should be, hopefully, meeting our stakeholders' requirements, whatever they may be. But of course, we've defined those right at the outset. And of course, you've got your delivered event activities. Coupled with that as well, the results of the event management system as well, which again all goes back into that cycle of improvement where we go back, feed, reevaluate, go again. So it's an onwards rolling cycle of activities. Now, if ISO 2012-1 isn't your thing, and I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, but particularly as we're a sustainable event show, there are a number of different and other related ISO standards. It can not only be implemented instead of, but also can support ISO 2012-1 implementation. So on the environmental side, if what you do as a business massively impacts the environment, this is where we should be thinking. ISO 14001 is an environmental management system standard. So that focuses specifically on environmental aspects, impacts, and how you manage that, or manage those. Again, same approach though, it's that plan, do, check, act approach. If you're a venue, for example, like we are today, energy management is a massive issue for venues and most large organisations, hotels, conferences, etc. Energy use, 50001 is a fantastic standard to implement. The other thing to mention here as well, you don't have to implement all these standards. Cherry pick the best bits, review them, tease out the best bits that work for you. There's a fantastic section in 50001 that requires organisations to conduct an energy review. So even if you just use that particular part of it, great. That can support ISO 2012-1. You don't need to get certified. Just do it. It's a fantastic set of requirements, and of course based on international best practice as well. I'll whistle through these. I've got 5 minutes left. If you work in a procurement function and you're looking at sustainability, ISO 2400 is the standard for you. It's guidance. It's not a certifiable standard. Some certification bodies will look at it as a certifiable standard, but again, use it as best practice. Develop a procurement strategy and implement it, focused on sustainable procurement. ISO 26000, social responsibility guidelines. Again, that takes it above and beyond. That's like a telephone book, that particular standard. It's massive. PAS 2060. If you're looking at carbon neutrality, again, PAS 2060 is a fantastic standard for you. That's rapidly becoming an ISO standard, ISO 14068. It's imminently about to come out. On the more social people side and risk management side, health and safety, ISO 45001, ISO 45003. I always promote the two together. ISO 45001 establishes the management system for health and safety. 45003 looks at psychosocial risk, so it looks at the health, basically, in health and safety, and focuses on mental health and well-being. Again, a massive massive issue for the event industry, is making sure the people are looked after. If you're in the events management industry, and data protection is a massive issue, and you're looking at information security, 27001, 27701, again, useful standards to refer to and implement. And in the event that a disaster takes place, ISO 22301, business continuity standard. Again, there's some really good practice in there. That's one of the most purchased standards that doesn't actually get certified to. It's really interesting to see the stats on that. But a lot of organisations will purchase that standard, apply that best practice, and keep the BC plans maintained in line with international requirements. We've also got a new one on the block, again, rapidly becoming an ISO standard, BS 25700. That's a British standard at the moment. That's around modern slavery guidance. Again, can be an issue in supply chains, may not be relevant to you. If you're a supplier to the event industry, ISO 9001, the daddy of them all, if you like. That's one of the oldest standards out there. That's about products and services. So if you're providing a service to the event industry, or you're providing products to the event industry, and you want to maintain the quality of those products, again, ISO 9000 could be a really good starting point. And then lastly, a couple of the standards around governance, compliance. So ISO 37300 is around governance. Again, guidelines, not certifiable. ISO 37001 is around anti-bribery. Again, little used standard, but really, really powerful in ensuring that you are complying with anti-bribery guidelines, not guidelines, but laws. And then finally, ISO 37301 is around compliance management as well, so compliance within your organisation. So the key takeaway from this is, if you're implementing 2012-1, fantastic. If you're implementing one of these other standards, equally fantastic. It's not a problem. You can build on these. You can integrate these standards, and ultimately, have an organisational-wide management system that really, really works for your business, which is aligned to international best practice. So finally, if you're thinking about implementing a standard, this would be my advice to you. Firstly, do your research. There's a lot of standards out there. I think about 23,000 and increasing rapidly at the last count. So do your research. Really importantly, get management buy-in and support. You cannot do this from the bottom up. You need that top management commitment. Obtain a copy of the standards, obviously, possibly engage the services as a consultant. Conduct a gap analysis. That's really important. And understand where you are, with this. Some of this you'll have in place already. A lot of the doing activities you'll be doing, So again, build on that and build a management system around it. Benefits of accredited certification bodies. Now, sadly, as I mentioned earlier, ISO 20121 isn't actually an accredited standard, but many of them are. So where possible, we'd always recommend trying to use a UCAS accredited certification body. And that's really important because it gives the whole thing much more credibility. Onwards from there, obviously you can create your management system documentation and go through the implementation activities. So the communications and awareness, basically launch it to the business. Conduct audits, make sure it's ready for assessment before you go into that assessment stage. Act on the findings of those audits and monitoring activities, and then obviously that's going to start then the wheel turning on those continual improvement activities. Finally, all of that feeds into management review, and then finally through into certification. So if you're doing all of these steps in the right way, in the right order, you should have a really robust and effective management system framework, regardless of which ISO you choose. So thank you for listening today. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to open it up for questions if we have any.
We do. Yeah, I'm gonna put you to the test here, Paul. Thanks so much for that. That was a really interesting presentation there. So there's quite a few questions here around getting certified that we've got from the audience. I'm going to try and condense them a little bit for you in the interest of time. So we've got what's the difference between being certified and being accredited? And then there's also a couple of questions around how long does it take for one-off events and for companies to get certified? How much does it cost? And can you certify only individual events, or is it possible to certify an entire portfolio at once?
Right.
No pressure.
Start at the top. The difference between accreditation and certification is a question we get asked all the time, because lots of organisations say, yeah, we got accredited. No, you didn't. You got certified in the ISO world. So a certification body will come in and certify your organisation to that particular standard. Now, the certification body, if they're worth their salt, will be an accredited certification body, and that's where this UCAS accreditation comes in. So certification bodies get accredited, you as an organisation get certified. In terms of the timescale, you decide basically. Typical timescales to implement a 2012-1 management system, or any other management system framework for that matter, you could be talking anything between sort of 6 to 12 months. And realistically, that's a sensible time frame. You don't want to do it any quicker than that, because you run the risk of basically, not implementing things properly, or not being properly understood in the organisation. What was the last one? Sorry.
Can you certify individual events or an entire portfolio?
Yes. So, yes is the answer to that. Either or. So you can certify a specific event and look then to expand the scope as you go. So start small, or you can go big bang and basically certify an entire portfolio of events if you choose to. In terms of cost, it varies, again, depending on the size, scale of the organisation, but also of the events as well. So most of the certification bodies will work on basically a day rate approach to certification activities. So I can't really put a number on that, unfortunately, but again, we can get prices for you if you choose to go down that route.
Awesome. And we've got time for just one more question here, so I'm going to put the challenging one to you. How do you find the balance between environmental, social and economic if it affects all? E.g. more expensive travel but not as much carbon being used, etc.
Yes, that age-old issue of trying to get that balance. So many organisations, as I mentioned earlier, will go for the low-hanging fruit and implement environmental solutions. That's great, but of course then some of those environmental solutions cost money, which impacts on your financial sustainability. So again, there's no right or wrong answer to any of this. It basically comes down to what the organisation can afford, what the approach it wants to take. But what I would say is go back to those issues, evaluate those issues, and think about what you can realistically affect and change to positive effect. whilst also trying to achieve that again, constant balance. I liken it to the sort of three-legged stool, because if you take one of those legs away, you've not got a sustainable platform to sit on. So you need to achieve that balance. Most organisations do achieve it to some degree, but again, it takes time and it will mature over time. So first year you might get some quick wins. Again, that can be reinvested into year 2, year 3, and onwards and upwards from there, basically.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time for now. Thank you very much, Paul. And yeah, we'll be back here in 5 minutes with the next session.